Good afternoon. Hello, everybody. How are you? This is Enrique Sanchez with Spanish United. Today on the show, I have a guest. His name is Logan. Logan, would you feel free to introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, thank you so much, Enrique. It's great to be here this afternoon with you. So my name is Logan Lee, and I am the lead pastor, along with my wife, of Ignite LA Church. We're a new church that just launched here in the Los Angeles area. I also am a nonprofit consultant, so I work with small business owners and helping people create economic self-sufficiency through entrepreneurship. So I'm really passionate about social enterprise and helping people connect to resources that help better their lives spiritually, emotionally, and physically as well.
That's excellent. I think that is something that is very needed, especially in the city of Los Angeles, where it is a city where there is opportunity, but a lot of people don't have access to reach those opportunities and reach those resources. And as you know, there's a lot of uh, issues with homelessness in the city. So I think you're doing a wonderful job.
Thank you.
Yes. So today's topic is going to be about Hispanophobia and conservative Christianity. And you, as a pastor, I believe you could be very instrumental in reaching Hispanics that may feel marginalized by many churches. So, can you explain what your church does, and how do you feel your church or conservative Christianity as a whole could better its relationship with the Hispanic community?
Yeah, well, first of all, just a little bit more about my background. So I grew up in the Midwest, in a city called Omaha, Nebraska. And I grew up in a church environment, in a Pentecostal church environment. But my personal background, my dad is African American, my mom's family is white, Irish, Caucasian. But I grew up in a church with 60 different nationalities present. And so from the time I was just a young kid, I was learning Spanish from the time I was in kindergarten. I had a lot of Latino friends, a lot of, African, Middle Eastern, Asian friends. And so from a very early age, I really had a deep understanding, I felt, of really what it meant, that the gospel, that the message of Jesus is not just for one people group, it's for all people, it's for all the world. And so that really kind of laid a good foundation for me. As far as the Latino community goes, the Hispanic community goes, from a very early age, I've had lots of Latino and Hispanic friends. When I was back in Omaha, I actually worked on the south side of Omaha, and I don't know if you're aware, but Omaha has a large Latino population,
No,
and
I
a lot of
I
people.
was not aware of it.
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of one of our best kept secrets. If you ever go there, the south side of Omaha is predominantly Hispanic. It's like 80, 85% Hispanic Latino, becoming a little bit more diverse now, but historically very Latino. But now what you see is you see an entire streets full of businesses like taquerias, barbershops, dulcerias, like all kinds of like small businesses that have been started by immigrants from predominantly Mexico, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Central and South and America and Mexico.
Mhm.
And that's always been that way as long as I can remember. Probably going back at least like 30, 35 years, people that had come to the Midwest to work in like the meat packing industry and then had stayed, started families and started their own businesses. And so ultimately what I found was just a large presence in that community. And for me personally, you know, being somebody who is of color as well, I felt like a kinship with them. I felt a connection. Both, my wife actually is an immigrant herself, but from the Middle East, and one of her first friends in America was a Mexican classmate of hers, and they took her in at a young age, and she became like family to them. And to this day, we're still good friends and family with them. And so, in a way, I feel like an honorary Latino. But I always loved speaking Spanish. I've been to Mexico twice, been to El Salvador and other places. So it's always kind of been a part of my life. And as I learned, as I've grown older, I've really connected with friends of mine that are dreamers that have benefited from the Dream Act. Friends that have had multiple issues with their legal status, their residency in this country for various reasons, and it really broadened my outlook on what that means from a position. So you mentioned conservative Christianity. I think to me, um, as a church, you know, Jesus himself was a refugee. He was an immigrant, and there's a whole lot of discussion we could have about that. But ultimately, we're called to stand up for the oppressed, for the
Hmm.
marginalized, for those that are the least of these, because that's what God wants. That's the heart of God. That's what justice looks like. Now,
Hmm.
that doesn't mean that we don't have systems or laws or processes, but it means
Hmm.
that we approach everything with a sense of compassion.
Of course.
So that's always what I've tried to do. That's really what we are doing now with our ministry is really being present for all people, and really making sure that we keep the message of the gospel, that is the person of Jesus, in the forefront of everything we do when it comes to race and ethnicity and things like that.
Mm. And I feel that that is something that is missing within conservative churches is that, and from what I've seen, because I also lived in the Midwest for a couple of years. I did a few years of university in Ferris State University in Michigan, and I lived in Missouri for a few years. So I lived outside of the state of California for almost 10 years. So I know how the Midwest is. And when I went there at the time, it was close to 9/11, and you didn't see too many Hispanic people at that time. So I personally experienced a lot of xenophobia and racism, and especially within the church. I myself come from a Jewish background, but I at the time was not practicing Judaism, and I've experienced a lot of prejudice within the church, and that kind of like turned me off to the gospel for a long time. I became Christian about three years ago. So I yeah, thank you. I believe that one of the reasons why a lot of Hispanics feel disenfranchised from the church is because the church. And again, I'm not speaking on everybody, but I just feel that a lot of churches are too involved in politics, and instead of getting involved in social justice like you were mentioning earlier, like Jesus said, go for the oppressed, look after the people. It's like they're more involved in status and in money and in power than looking after the community. And I'm talking about the community in general, because do you know how much money and funding a lot of churches receive in tithing and donations? I would expect that in places where you have churches that supposedly are looking after the community, those communities should be taken care of. And I see many churches in Hispanic communities or minority communities that are doing nothing for the community. And it's very sad because the churches are supposed to be a light of hope to the world, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you know, when you talk about a church or church planting or engaging a community, one of the first things you want to ask is, okay, what are the needs of this community? What's this community's story? And when I say community, I don't just mean a geographical community, but you know, whoever it is, if you're working with one ethnic group of people or multiple, what is their story? So if I'm talking to you, Enrique, hearing that you're Hispanic, but you also come from a Jewish background, like I want to get to know yet that story. I want to know, what does that look like for you, because it's a very unique cultural outlook. Because how I communicate with you and what your needs are going to be different than someone else's, right? And I think
Mm,
that a lot of times, as a church, as a capital C church in the West, I should say, I should make a distinction there, because I think we're talking about kind of North American, Christianity, which is, if you've ever been, or talk to people from other backgrounds, it's very different than what you see in other parts of the world. And I
mm,
think that um, the distinction is that we often try like a one size fits all approach
mm,
to how we have a service or how we engage a community or what we do. But in reality, everything needs to be contextualized. So, the gospel message doesn't change, but the context and the medium absolutely has to change. So whether it's going more digital or whether it's, trying a different approach, we have to make sure that we're keeping the message forefront, but we have to look at how we're engaging people, and that goes with our dollars. Where are we spending our money? What are our priorities? Are we focused on mission, which is a encompassing word, but are we focused on mission, right? Why we exist, our purpose, or are we focused more on the aesthetic of our gatherings or of our identity? So I think it's really important that we differentiate between the two of those and know what's most important.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And one of the reasons why I started Spanish United is because I feel that Hispanics are the largest minority group in America that don't have a voice, that are not heard. You hear a lot about a lot of things happening in the African community and recently now with the Asian community, but you don't really hear things happen with the Hispanic community. One of the reasons why I started Spanish United is because I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but last year there was a Hispanic boy by the name of Andres Gurado who was working as a security guard in Gardena, who was murdered by police. And I was very appalled by the way a lot of people were demonizing this kid on social media. Not knowing him, not knowing his background, just because he was Hispanic, they automatically demonized him as, not a good person. And I said, something needs to be done because this kid had no criminal record. He was working two jobs. He was going to school to become a doctor. And then this thing happened to him, which I thought was very, very unfair. And these are things that happen all the time, but you just don't hear about it. So I feel that I'm using Spanish United, my organization, as a voice to reach out to Hispanic people because it's like there is no focus on Hispanic human rights, and that's something that I feel that is very oxymoron, as they say. And I think that there needs to be more involvement of Hispanics in social justice. It's like a lot of Hispanics, because a lot of them are undocumented, or many of them tend to take a passive aggressive approach, that they don't like to get involved in activism or civil rights or social justice, but it is something that affects us personally because we are considered people of color. We are considered a minority, and we're here. We're not gonna disappear. We are a very large minority, and I think
Right.
using my organization, I feel that I could reach out to a lot of people.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, excuse me, I think that oftentimes what happens is we have different situations where we don't always, different people groups get highlighted for different reasons, right? But we don't always know why. I think it's important that we focus on everybody and that we are consistent in our messaging.
Mhm. And I also think that part of it has to do with a language barrier because you have a lot of people that don't speak English. So even if someone is going through an injustice, people don't know how to report it. They don't know how to reach out to people. I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of hate crimes against Hispanics go unreported.
Right. Yeah. And I think that, like you said too, it's hard, right? Because, data can be communicated in different ways. And um, ultimately, there's a lot of narrative shaping that goes on.
Mhm.
And, like you mentioned, without truly, if we don't approach things with the heart of compassion and understanding, we're never really going to be able to see things for what they really are. We're only going to see what we want to see, right? And
Right, of
so
course.
that's true all across the board. And so that's why it's important to, like the young man you mentioned in Gardena, that's why it's important that we um, look at things through the eyes of Jesus, how I think Jesus would look at things, which is looking at each person's intrinsic value and understanding, okay, and I know, like, from my perspective, coming from a biracial background and just from my wife's background, one of the things that I've had to develop and I've learned, I think, over the years is just an understanding of um, multiple perspectives. And I think that one of the things that we've seen, in this past year or so, just with more of a highlight for justice, like you mentioned, particularly in one community, but I think ultimately it needs to be for all communities that are marginalized. I think that one of the issues there is a lack of perspective. So we each have a unique perspective, but if I never try to understand your perspective, if you never try to understand my perspective, then I'm going to feel like I'm the one being, demonized, or you're going to feel like you're the one who's being criticized, and we're never really going to be able to truly, feel what each other feel and understand what that means and how it influences our actions.
So I wanted to also ask a question. Since you're a pastor and you have lived in the Midwest and whatnot, have you ever like seen or heard Hispanophobia like within the churches, like how a lot of conservative churches view when it comes to illegal immigration or that type of thing? Like, have you ever experienced or seen any type of Hispanophobia within the church?
Yeah, I have, and it's interesting because for a long time, the narrative that I heard or I understood, and I'll just give you a specific example. So um, when it comes to like the Dream Act, right? So
Mhm,
granting temporary residency, if you will, and then the right to work and other privileges to
mhm,
individuals that, as you know, were not born in the United States, and they were brought here as children, predominantly by parents through no fault of their own. But then they were, growing up here. They went to school here. Some of them went to college here. They've had kids here. They've been productive members of society, but due to circumstances out of their control, they're not able to obtain full-time permanent residency or pass citizenship in the United States. And I think for a long time, a lot of the narrative that I heard about that was a simplistic one, and it kind of boiled down to, if you are quote illegal, you don't belong here. And the word illegal was used in a way as if, okay, this person is a criminal and they did something wrong. But in reality, the more that I, researched it, and the more that I talked to um, friends of mine that had had this experience and other individuals, the more I got to understand that the majority of people that were referred to in this way when it comes to the Dream Act specifically were people that had been, brought to this country, for example, at age 8, fleeing a civil war in, El Salvador or Guatemala, or
mhm,
they came from Mexico by, from parents, or they, and they didn't have a choice if they were going to cross the border, so to speak. They didn't have a choice. They're following their parents. They had to do what their family did. And so,
mhm.
is it right to deny them the ability to work, to live, to study, if to become permanent residents and citizens, if they so choose to want to engage in our society, when they have done so much, when they have committed no crimes, they are model citizens in every sense of the word, aside from the fact that they came here as children, usually from no fault of their own. So
Mhm.
in terms of in terms of that, I think for a long time that was never really communicated. Um, and I do know that the denomination that I'm a part of, the network, the Assemblies of God here in Southern California, um, we now, for the first time ever, I believe, starting this year, are now credentialing and ordaining pastors who were not born in the United States legally.
Mhm.
So that's been a big shift, allowing dreamers and individuals who like that to obtain credentials in an organization like that. That was a big shift. So I think we're seeing shifts in understanding. I think a lot of narratives and a lot of you know discrimination and racism that may have been perpetuated from previous generations. I think like younger generations are saying, you know what, and even older generations that I've talked to, other older pastors and leaders, that they've said, you know what, I was wrong. I don't think I understood what this was about. I don't think I was compassionate. I think I was very, I had a very simplistic, you know, uh, North American Caucasian view of, the gospel and of race and ethnicity. And I think that drove a lot of my decision making for many years. I've had pastors tell me that. So while I have seen that, I think that we're starting to see a shift. I think that it's not it's obviously not enough. It's not as fast as it should be. But I'm hopeful that as we progress forward in the coming, years and coming months, that we're going to see more of that, because I think that the church is waking up to the fact that um, we haven't done a good job. And I think COVID-19 was a big wake up call to people that either weren't doing things well, they were focusing more on attendance rather than transformation. And then I think at the same time, it was a big wake up call to people who, particularly ministry leaders, who thought they were doing a good job when it came to like, race and justice, etc. And in reality, they weren't doing as well as they thought. So I think that we're trending in that direction, but it's going to take time and a lot of focus.
Hmm. And I think that with COVID-19, I think this reopened the discussion about inequality and poverty and racial and justice in the country, because that was something that the church was always brushing under the carpet, because it's like they don't want to deal with it. And it's like with anything, it's like with a with a cancer. A cancer doesn't start out as a cancer; starts out as a tumor. It starts out as a little tumor here. If you don't deal with that tumor is going to grow, it's going to metastasize, and it's going to become cancer. And I think with COVID-19, I think it's showing the cancer that we've been having in society for a long time, with racial injustice, economic injustice. I think the whole problem that we have in our society is not only racial, but it's also economic as well. It's like I see a lot of people criticize the homeless, and I think a lot of people don't realize that part of the reason why there's so much homelessness in Los Angeles and even throughout the country, because homelessness is not just described in one area, has to do with economic injustice. It has to do with the lack of rent control, the lack of a social safety net. So when people lose their economic livelihood, there is no safety net within a community, and a lot of people end up on the street without no fault of their own. And I think that the church needs to emphasize more on social safety net, and at the same time bringing in money and resources into those areas. Like I myself, I'm trying to raise up money to set up centers. I want to do like after school programs, language centers for Hispanic communities, because in every Hispanic community that I've been to in America, doesn't matter where it is, I see that there is a lack of after school programs. There is a lack of cultural centers, language centers, tutoring centers. While in the Asian community, like for example, like in San Gabriel, like in Arcadia, I go there like once or twice a month. Um, I see language centers, cultural centers. They even have a place that's called the Herald Christian Center, believe it or not, founded by Chinese Christians. I assume they're associated with the Assemblies of God, that they provide medical, optometry, dentistry, either for free or at a very low cost. And I'm just amazed that Chinese who have been here for maybe less less of a time than Hispanics are able to put funding and resources into their community. Like, while in my community, it's lacking. It's like I feel that the Hispanic community in the United States, in every city that I go to, is dying. And this
Well, if
cannot
you ever get a
be.
chance to, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, if you ever get a chance to visit Omaha, visit the south side of Omaha, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised, because I think what you're saying is true. I think there's some areas that do come to mind, like the community I'm mentioning in Omaha, which is a tight knit community, and then obviously like you know probably parts of like Little Havana and like Miami. But aside from those areas, like you're mentioning, You're right. A lot of the majority areas, I think, in the Hispanic community, are there's just not a lot of economic momentum the way it should be, although there could be, right?
Mhm,
And I think that what you see a lot is other communities, like you see the Jewish community, right?
mhm,
Um, you see here in LA, like I mean, Koreatown.
mhm,
You see, Tarangelis, west side of LA,
mhm.
so much Persian influence. I would say here in LA specifically, the Persian and Korean communities are very wealthy in terms of
Yes,
assets and in terms of influence, and that's not by accident. And so I think, yeah, ultimately, it does come down to on an economic level, it has to come down to a kind of a collective sense of identity. Like, hey, if I'm going to achieve this, I'm not doing it just for myself and my family. I'm doing it for my community. I want to
exactly.
I want to keep the money in my community. The majority of dollars that are spent, um, I know, particularly in the African American community, and I believe also the Hispanic community, they don't stay within those communities very long. They go somewhere else.
Correct.
And so what has to happen is, if communities want to grow and prosper from the inside out, it doesn't mean you can't enjoy and spend money other places, but you have to operate with an educated sense of economics, right?
Exactly.
The social understanding behind goods and services, and who am I trying to support. So for me personally, I know one of my favorite places, if I'm back home, there's a panaderia that I go to, and I spend my money there. I don't want to go and get it from a chain store. I want to get bread from this family run bakery. It's been there for 30 years. Like, you know, it's things like that. That's
Yes,
how community is built over time, and how you invest in your community.
exactly. And I see that's a problem. I see various problems. Like for example, you see a lot of Hispanics that do become prosperous and wealthy. Instead of staying in the community and investing, they move out, and that money doesn't stay in.
Right.
That's problem number one. Problem number two is that you have gentrification, which is another problem. I'm seeing a lot of Hispanic cities throughout America, not just in Los Angeles, where that you see high income people move in, and then the people that are living there have to leave because it no longer becomes affordable, and then that area becomes demographically different. Like I'm even seeing it like in East LA. East LA has historically been Hispanic, Mexican, American. Monterey Park is right next to East LA that's majority Chinese. And what I've been seeing is that a lot of Chinese are moving into East LA, and they're gentrifying parts of East LA. And I feel that if the trend continues, East LA is going to become majority Chinese. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing or whatever, but I just
Yeah.
feel that a lot of Hispanics are being pushed out from many of their areas. I'm seeing it in Spanish Harlem, in New York. I'm seeing it in many parts of Houston, in Chicago, and in Miami. And I
Right.
feel that it's a form of ethnic cleansing without having to fire a shot. By pushing
Yeah.
people out of their communities. And when people are forced to move away from their areas, from where they work, it becomes unsustainable. You cannot have a city where people cannot live and work where they live. It's just unsustainable. That's what they teach you in economics 101 and 110. You cannot have a community where you work but you cannot live in.
Right. Right. Because what that does over time is it creates an inequity, right? Inequality, and then you're never able to obtain enough resources and assets to actually um, build anything substantial. And yeah, that's a whole topic I love talking about, like economic development and urban planning and asset mapping and all those kinds of things that I've learned about and still learning about, and how, just to bring it local, particularly in a city like LA. And I've lived in LA now for just over a year, but I've visited multiple times. And just as I get to know the region more, you see how every city, but particularly LA, how money moves, right? And how
Mm,
the communities I mentioned, depending on where you are,
mm.
there's a substantial difference, and you can see it and feel it everywhere you go,
Oh yeah,
depending on what
absolutely.
community you're in.
Yeah, when I was a practicing Orthodox Jew, I was part of the Persian community for about 5 or 6 years, and I'm very well familiar with the Persian Jewish community in Tarangelis and Brentwood and Westwood and in the Valley. It's just amazing. A lot of them don't even speak English. A lot of them are like first generation immigrants, and they just have money, and it just boggles my mind. But again, a lot of it has to do with a community being tight knit, but at the same time they're investing in each other. It's like they don't have the mentality that it's me, my family, nobody else matters. Like for communities like the Persians, for example, it's not just only their family. Everybody else is their extended family. It's like when someone of their community fails, they fail too, and everybody else fails. And I think Hispanics need to start taking that approach that you cannot think, okay, it's just me and myself. No, it's like when somebody else of your community fails, you also fail because that becomes a reflection on you. And I've experienced a lot
Right.
of prejudice, myself and my person. Like a lot of people have the stereotype, and this also goes with other minorities that are also wealthy, that if you're Hispanic, you will not achieve anything in life. Your only purpose in life is to be a worker, um, to be disposable. They don't see you as
Right.
any other potentials. Like a lot of model minorities get shocked when a Hispanic is actually educated, that speaks
Right.
well, that went to college. It's like, they have that same close mentality. And that's something that I want to change with my movement. Like I'm trying to emphasize on education. And like Hispanics have always been very conservative on getting an education, and that's the main factor that's holding Hispanics back. Yes, there is prejudice. Yes, there is racism. Yes, there's discrimination, but Hispanics have to change the way they think that you cannot, be working as a janitor for the rest of your life. It's like that's something that you do temporary. That's something that you don't do long term. And I think
Right.
through education, that's going to transform lives. But unless people take the initiative to get educated, the cycle of poverty is not going to change.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, it takes a concerted effort, and it takes more than just one generation. So communities that we see that are economically well off and established, it didn't just happen in the last 10, 20 years. It's the seeds of that were planted a long time. And like you even mentioned, I think I read a statistic at one point that Persian immigrants have the highest rate of post-secondary education among all immigrants to the United States. Like the
Hmm.
majority of Persians that have a master's degree or higher is very high
Yes.
compared to the average immigrants. And I think the second after that might be like Nigerians, and goes on from there. And
Right.
just from my personal experience, like
Yes.
I,
Yes.
I can I can see that. But you're right. You're absolutely right. It starts with just that expectation in the culture, right? And it starts in the home. It starts with parents and with um, a standard that has to be developed. So
I definitely agree. I'm going to wrap things up. Before we go, is there any questions or comments you would like to give, like to leave?
yeah, yeah. I just thanks. This has been great. I just wanted to say too. I think that if anyone's listening, the most important thing as a follower of Jesus, one of the things that I'm always trying to do is I'm always asking God, and I'm always looking at myself and my own heart, and I'm going, is there anything in me that is prejudice? And when I say prejudice, I don't mean, it might be racist or
Right.
discriminating, but is there anything in me that is allowing me to prejudge somebody for any reason at all? Could be for any reason. I think that that's a question that as a follower of Christ, we have to ask ourselves every day, because that's really how we grow, and that's how we mature over time. We can never just assume that, oh, I'm here, I'm at a good place, I'm good. No, we have to continually grow and continually have a heart and a posture of openness before God, so that we could say, You know what? Today I might not have been perfect, but I did everything I could have done. All right, I laid everything out on the table. Um, if I saw something that was unjust, I did whatever I could to make it right. I educated myself. I loved my brother. I loved my sister. I operated with compassion, whatever it might be. Um, just make sure that every day that we're doing that, and that is how I think ultimately we will see um, justice flow down.
Perfect. I definitely agree with you 100%. Thank you so much for taking your time to talk with me, Logan. I truly appreciate it. We'll definitely keep in touch. And as soon as I'm done, I'll definitely send you the link to the podcast.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Enrique. Enjoy.
Have yourself a good afternoon. Bye bye.